Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Janelle Hughes from the Office of Safe and Supportive Schools, Readiness and Emergency Management for Schools Technical Assistance Center, also known as the REMCA Center. I would like to welcome you to our webinar, Impacts of Lead Exposure on Learning and Integration into School Emergency Management Planning. This webinar will take a look at the impacts of lead exposure on the learning environment and how education agencies, in collaboration with their community partners, can integrate lead testing and reduction programs into overall school emergency management planning. Participants will have an opportunity to pose questions to today's presenters in a Q&A session that follows immediately after the presentation section of the event. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the TA Center's website via our webinars page. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. The following tips will help ensure you are able to download files, hear the audio, request technical assistance, and ask questions during this event. To download a copy of relevant handouts, use the Files pod on the left-hand side of your screen. You can select the name of the handout or the web link that you would like to review, and then click it to access. As a reminder, there is no dial-in for this webinar. Audio is available via the link provided. If you are experiencing difficulty hearing the audio stream, please turn up your computer speaker volume at this time. And if you experience any additional technical difficulties during the webinar, please contact the TA Center at info@remcacenter.org. You can also request technical assistance using that Q&A pod. And questions will be viewable to our moderator only. To ask a question during the Q&A portion of the webinar, again, you can use that Q&A pod on your screen as well, and that message will be sent to the facilitator. And you can pose questions at any time during the webinar, although they will be answered at the end as time permits following the presentation. If you would like to submit a question and are not able to do so via the box provided on your screen, or if you would like to send us a question after the event, we encourage you to first join us on the Community of Practice for a 30-minute web chat on this topic, and you can also email your questions to info@remcacenter.org. I would like to start by introducing my co-presenters for today. Madeline Sullivan is a Management and Program Analyst at the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Safe and Supportive Schools. She wears many hats, leading a coordinated federal effort on school preparedness, as well as administering the REMCA Center. I serve as the Deputy Project Director at the REMCA Center, and I'm also joined by my colleague, Alex Dayton, a Senior Research Associate. The REMS team works in partnership with the Office of Safe and Supportive Schools, formerly known as the Office of Safe and Healthy Students, to execute the mission of the TA Center and to fulfill the department's goals to assist schools, institutions of higher education, and their partners in building their safety, security, and emergency management programs. We're also joined by Victoria Ellenbogen, who is a physical scientist in the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water. She is the National Coordinator for EPA's 3 Ts for Reducing Lead in Drinking Water in Schools and Child Care Facilities program. She also serves as the implementation lead for the National Primary Drinking Water Regulation, the Lead and Copper Rule. Before joining the EPA, she was a research participant at the National Center for Environmental Health within the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Health from East Carolina University and is working towards a Master of Public Health from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. We're so excited to welcome Victoria today and to partner with EPA on this event. Let's take a look at the agenda for today's webinar. We'll begin by discussing why it's important to highlight lead exposure in the context of school safety. We'll then take a closer look at the impacts of lead exposure on the learning environment, as well as recommendations that can support integration of this technological hazard into overall emergency operations plan. Our partner from EPA will join us again in sharing information about tools that education agencies and their partners can access to support lead reduction and testing. And following the presentation, again, we'll conduct our Q&A session where EPA and ED staff, as well as REMCA Center staff, will answer any questions that you have about the topic. And again, we invite you to join us directly after the webinar for a 30-minute web chat on our Community of Practice, during which we'll answer any additional questions that we could not cover during the event. And we're really looking forward to that as well. So I will turn things over to Victoria now to give us a little bit more of a deeper look at the background on lead. Victoria?
Hi, Janelle. Thank you so much. And I'm very excited to be invited to talk on this webinar series, especially about such an important issue to us. So I'm going to provide a brief background on lead, some sources, health effects, and lead in drinking water. So before we dive into the specifics about lead in drinking water and lead exposures in schools, let me first just give you a quick background on lead. So lead is a toxic metal. It's harmful to human health, and there is no safe blood lead level for children. In the human body, toxic lead can substitute for healthy calcium, which is a mineral that strengthens the bones. Lead is carried in the bloodstream and can harm the nervous system and brain. What is not excreted is absorbed into the bones where it can collect for a lifetime. The CDC states that today at least 4 million households have children living in them that are being exposed to high levels of lead. Then there are approximately 500,000 U.S. children ages 1 to 5 with blood lead levels above 5 micrograms per liter, which is the reference level CDC uses to take action. EPA and CDC have consistently stated, and as I mentioned before, there is no safe blood lead level in children that has been identified. So let's just talk quickly a little bit more about the health effects so we can better understand. Young children are especially susceptible to lead exposure because of their frequent hand-to-mouth activities and their metabolism. Their bodies absorb more metals at a higher rate than the average adult does. Children's nervous systems are still undergoing development and thus are more vulnerable to the effects of toxic agents. The only way to determine a child's lead level is to have the child's blood tested. This is why EPA recommends contacting a health provider to learn more about the blood level testing. Pregnant and nursing staff should also be aware of the harmful risks of lead exposure to nursing infants and developing fetuses of pregnant women. Mothers who have had exposure to lead in the past may store lead in their bones, and lead may be released in times of calcium stress like pregnancy and lactation. Lead can affect almost every organ and system in the body. The central nervous system is particularly sensitive to lead, especially in children. And lead can also damage kidneys and the reproductive system. Even low blood lead levels, those below the 5 micrograms per deciliter we talked about on the previous slide, have been associated with reduced IQ and attention span, learning disabilities, poor classroom performance, hyperactivity, behavioral problems, and impaired growth and hearing loss. Because childhood lead exposure often occurs with no immediate symptoms, it frequently goes unrecognized. The degree of harm from lead exposure depends on a number of factors, including the frequency, duration, and level of the exposure, and individual susceptibility factors. Those might be age, previous exposure history, nutrition, and health. And in addition, the degree of harm depends on one's total exposure from lead from all the sources in the environment. So exposure from lead can come from different sources. This can include lead-based paint and dust, lead industry, lead in air and soil, and some imported consumer products, and of course what we're going to be focusing a little bit more on today, lead in drinking water. So lead in drinking water can be a significant contributor to overall exposure to lead, and this is particularly important for infants whose diets consist of liquids made with water. This might be baby food, juice, or formula. The way lead can get into drinking water is through contact with plumbing materials containing lead. These might be lead pipes and lead solder, as well as lead service lines. The service line is the line connecting the home or building to the larger main line. These are more commonly found in older homes, especially homes built before 1988. Lead can be found in older brass fittings and fixtures and valves, and in various drinking water outlets and coolers, so the water fountains and faucets that we're looking at in schools and childcare facilities. What I want to make sure to mention, and you can see the quote from our 3Ts guide at the bottom of the slide, is that water systems and water utilities work very hard to provide clean and safe drinking water to their customers, including schools. However, even when water entering the school meets all the federal and state public health standards for lead, older plumbing materials in these facilities may contribute to elevated lead levels. This is why it's so important for us to take special considerations in these facilities, places where our children are growing and learning. Okay, now I think I'm passing it back over to Janelle.
Thank you, Victoria. The Government Accountability Office released a report on lead in school drinking water and found that an estimated 43% of school districts serving 35 million students tested for lead in school drinking water. An estimated 41% of school districts serving 12 million students had not tested for lead. And among the school districts that did test, 37% found elevated lead. So in all school districts that found elevated lead in drinking water reported taking steps to reduce or eliminate exposure, including replacing fountains, as Victoria just mentioned, including installing filters and new fixtures, or providing bottled water. So the best way to know if the school's water is contaminated with lead is to, of course, test that water and after it has gone through a school's pipes, faucets, and other fixtures. The Harvard Chan School of Public Health also produced a report called Early Adopters, State Approaches to Testing School Drinking Water for Lead in the United States, and found that as of February 2018, 24 states and the District of Columbia had developed statewide school drinking water lead testing initiatives. EPA has also conducted research on this topic, which we've highlighted in the resources and web links. This graphic details which of those initiatives are state programs versus policies, with a majority being policies. If you see your state listed but are not aware of those existing policies or programs, we encourage you to view this report as well as the EPA site and map that's listed in our web links pod to access state-level information. The EPA State Leaders in Reducing Lead in Drinking Water map is included again in the web links pod for your reference later. States have adopted a variety of means to initiate testing programs. In almost 1/3 of the 25 states with the program, the state agency responsible for leading implementation was the state's Department of Environment. In other states, state agencies that led those efforts included Departments of Health, Departments of Education, Joint Departmental Leadership, as well as other institutions and groups. In 17 states, the school's participation in the school drinking water lead testing program was voluntary, while in the remaining states, participation was mandatory for those specified classification of schools. So it's really awesome, as you can see from this graphic, including details related to funding that supported testing, treatment, and other activities, that schools understand the importance of water testing programs and also the importance of collaborating to ensure the safety of students, whether that's collaboration with Departments of Education and Environment, as well as Departments of Health and other joint leadership offices. I'm going to turn things over to Madeline now so that we can talk a bit more about why this topic is important in the context of overall school safety and emergency preparedness planning. Madeline?
Thank you, Janelle, and welcome everyone. So it's not always possible to prevent all of the lead from getting into our school buildings or school facilities. Gratefully, there are meaningful steps that we can take to protect our school communities, even steps that we can take to protect our most vulnerable members. In situations like this, we can take steps to integrate this with the Safe School, EOP, and we can include goals and objectives and courses of action to help ensure that continual protection of the whole school community by using a set of integrated prevention, mitigation, and protection activities, and being ready to respond and recover, and then supporting all of these efforts with ongoing communication. So broadly speaking, being prepared can be defined as having the ability to effectively prevent, protect from, mitigate the impact of, respond to, and or recover from a threat or a hazard. More specifically speaking, or pragmatically speaking, being prepared means having a comprehensive school safety emergency operations plan, also known as the EOP or the school EOP. Effective plans are developed collaboratively with all of your community partners that have roles and responsibilities implementing that plan before, during, and after possible emergencies. And as always, we want to consider all of those 5 preparedness missions throughout that planning process. That means we want to be considering prevention and mitigation and protection, response, and recovery before, during, and after. And remembering all the time that the role of these plans are to keep, maintain, and nurture safe schools. So we developed this guidance. It's called the Guide for Developing High-Quality School Emergency Operations Plans in collaboration with our partners. These are partners from the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, the Department of Justice, its FBI, and Health and Human Services. We also call this the school guide. But so we developed this school guide collaboratively, and we built upon each agency's expertise as well as the many lessons learned from all of the recent incidents. Although EPA was not a partner, you can see how our work is easily integrated with one another and equally support school systems at multiple levels. So in the school guide, we put forth a common process model, and we refer to it as the 6-step planning process. So this is going to take the planning team through a comprehensive set of activities and processes that are needed for creating those new plans, as well as for revising and updating existing plans. And there's an emphasis on aligning these with emergency planning practices with those at the national, state, and local levels. And that might sound complicated, but it's not, because of these processes that we put forth and by virtue of you working directly with your partners, since they are more naturally connected to those different levels of planning. So these processes are going to facilitate and support the planning team, and as an outcome, they're going to have customized sets of goals and actions and courses of action. And this is going to help ensure that continual protection of your whole school community. And again, it's the use of those integrated prevention and mitigation activities that are going to help you and your partners be ready to respond and recover. And then again, it's always important to remember that all of these efforts are made much stronger when they're reinforced by ongoing communication with your community. Comprehensive planning takes into account a wide range of possible threats and hazards that might impact the school and its community. So we need to be considering all of these hazards and threats throughout the planning process, and we want to be addressing the safety and security of everyone and their needs before, during, and after an incident. And so this is going to include these 4 categories of those adversarial and human-caused threats, the biological hazards, our natural hazards, and the technological hazards. While we're using this all hazards approach, it's important to also use that all capabilities and all functions approach. Meaning, as we're developing courses of action, for example, our communications plan or our reunification plan, many of those are going to apply for the majority or a large number of incidents, and many of those are going to apply for prevention before, during, and after. So as we're thinking very specifically about an individual threat or hazard, like the possibility of lead exposure, and we're working on our communications plan related to this, it is important to remember that those communications are going to support other types of prevention activities. So we encourage you to think broadly as well. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, technological hazards include hazardous materials incidents and nuclear power plant failures and things like that. With these types of incidents, there's usually little or no warning that's going to precede an incident. And in many cases, persons nearby or potential victims might not know that they've even been affected until a later time, sometimes even many years later. So for example, health problems caused by hidden toxic waste sites, like that we saw at the Love Canal near Niagara Falls, New York surfaced years later after that initial exposure. So as we see number of technological incidents escalating, mainly as a result of the increased number of new substances, the opportunities for human error and exposure increases. So here's where I want to remind you of, we'll go into more detail later. For those of you who are familiar with step 2, where we call understanding the situation. In brief, we're going to do a full-on assessment, and then we're going to evaluate the hazards and threats that we've identified, and then after that, we're going to prioritize them based on the probability of it posing a threat or its possible magnitude, the amount of warning, how long it might last until it's detected, and then we're going to find, by using those considerations or those criteria, we assign numerical values, and we learn that it's better how to prioritize it using summary numerical values. So with this one, in consideration of that lead hazard, we know the probability is high, as Victoria was telling us, and we know that the warning, there's very little warning, and as we know, we might not be able to detect it immediately. So those are things that are going to increase its risk priority. Okay. With no federal law requiring testing for lead in school drinking water, federal agencies play a different role. So the Department of Education mission includes fostering educational excellence and promoting student achievement. And then so with that, the agency disseminates guidance and resources and tools and technical assistance to states and the school districts and schools about lead in school drinking water, as well as support in preventing or protecting against that. Our partners at the EPA, they are the ones with the expertise on the lead. So we often disseminated a lot of their materials and some with their partners and our partners, the CDC, and we we customize it to that school setting. So Victoria's office, the EPA's Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water, provides voluntary guidance to schools on how to test for and remediate lead in school drinking water. And this is part of EPA's mission to inform the public about environmental risks. In addition, the EPA's Office of Children's Health Protection is responsible for working with the EPA's 10 regional offices via their Healthy Schools coordinators who communicate with schools and help to disseminate the 3 Ps guidance. The CDC administers the School Health Policies and Practices Study, which is a periodic survey to monitor national health objectives that pertain to schools and school districts. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Victoria now, and she's going to provide details about EPA programs that have been created to support schools on this topic. Victoria?
Thank you so much, Madeline. So as we review the content of the 3 Ts toolkit, which I'm going to talk a little bit about now, I want just to remember what Madeline's just discussed. As we look more closely at the modules, you're going to see how it correlates to the 6-step planning process that she was just talking about. We begin with ongoing communication, which strengthens school safety and school EOP. We discuss partnerships, assessment, planning, testing, and improvement. And we're going to move into remediation and a few other modules that are added to our 3 Ts program. So let's talk about what the 3 Ts are. The 3 Ts take a training, testing, and taking action approach, which is what Madeline was just mentioning, to reduce lead in drinking water in schools and child care facilities. It's aimed to support training school and child care officials to raise awareness of the 3 Ts program and potential causes and health effects of lead in drinking water, to test drinking water in schools and child care facilities to identify potential lead problems, and to take action where needed to reduce lead in drinking water. This program and the resources associated with it got revamped last October with brand new templates, webinar recordings, and new step-by-step module format. In addition, we have a new map that links to all the state programs implementing voluntary and sometimes regulatory programs. This map also includes case studies, and we are in the process of adding more. The 3Ts program includes 7 modules, which you'll see on the right side of your screen. I'm going to spend the next little bit speaking to what you can find in each of these modules and how they can help schools and child care facilities implement water management plans. We recognize that this is a team effort and try to provide the tools needed to make this a success. Okay, so our module 1 is communicating, and we put this one first because it is super important for folks to be thinking about before they even begin doing sampling in the school. So module 1 is communicating and involves a lot of templates and tools for schools to pull down, to make their own, to edit, to put their letterhead on. And the point here is to provide as much training and tips and schedules and things that we can use to make sure that communicating is a success. Communicating, when done properly, can build trust in a community. It can get more folks involved and help build partnerships. It can keep people informed and let them know about the efforts that your school or child care facility is doing to reduce lead levels and lead exposure. Our second module is learning about lead. So this section provides you with the necessary tools and information to train your 3Ts team and staff. It includes health effects of lead information, lead sources, what to know about school and water system relationships, and how lead in drinking water is regulated. Module 3 is planning a 3Ts program. This one is really great for superintendents and school administrators who are trying to decide how to get started and who to partner up with. Module 3 includes some basics about planning a 3Ts program, how to establish partnerships and examples of partners. So those might be your water utility, the state or local health department, lead prevention groups, school associations. This module also includes info on assigning roles. And so as I mentioned before, this is a team effort. And knowing what roles are a part of your 3Ts program and who can help is super important to know up front. The 3Ts includes templates, including this module, and checklists to help you do this. Alrighty, moving right along is Module 4, developing a sampling plan. So in Module 4, we started to get into the testing part. We're focusing on developing a sampling plan. So to do this, the 3Ts resources help you conduct a walkthrough of your facility, determine sampling locations, and take an inventory. Also helps you find out whether your school is being served by a lead service line, and understand the sampling terminology and procedures so you're ready for Module 5. I just want to note that I'm moving through this quickly just to show you all the different modules and what you might find in there, but I would encourage you to absolutely take a look at the website and click through yourself so you can see some of the tools that might be available and helpful for you. Okay, so Module 5 is conducting sampling and interpreting results. Sampling for lead at drinking water fountains and water faucets does not need to be hard or intimidating. In fact, many labs may come out and help you do the sampling for you. In Module 5, we talk about how to take these samples on your own or providing instructions to a lab or a water utility at the fixtures that you've identified in Module 4 in the morning. So we take these samples in the early morning before the water has been used using a 250 milliliter sample bottle. We also discuss some do's and don'ts of sampling and additional sampling information for different fixture sizes. So when you're doing your walkthrough and thinking about where you should take samples to assess the lead risk, there might be different types of fixtures which may result in different types of sampling. But all that information is available in the 3Ts, so you know which sample is appropriate for which fixture. Module 6, we've gotten into taking action if elevated lead levels are identified. So solutions to lead problems typically are addressed on both a short-term and a long-term basis, and this module breaks up the different remediation options so you can decide what is going to work best for your situation. This would include immediate actions, so this might include shutting off the problem outlets or putting up signage. It might include short-term options like bottled water, flushing before each use, and filters, and long-term remediation options like replacing the fixture altogether. When I mention flushing, I'm talking about letting the water run at the outlets so that fresh water can come in. Basically, not drinking stale water. An important consideration for lead in drinking water is the potential for lead to leach into water and how that increases the longer the water remains in contact with leaded plumbing materials. As a result, facilities with intermittent water use patterns such as schools could be more likely for them to have elevated lead concentrations in drinking water. This is why EPA's program for addressing lead in drinking water in schools, aka the 3 Ts, touches on many ways to identify potential lead sources and to take action, as well as improving overall water quality in the school building. The Establishing Routine Practices section is great for finding easy ways you can regularly improve water quality, and these might include changing filters on a regular basis, setting schedules, and only using cold water for drinking and cooking. Okay, so last but definitely not least is record keeping. Module 7 is record keeping, and it has a bunch of templates for you to use to help you keep records in regards to the samples that have been collected and results, who's on your team, the roles that may have been played, who your partners are, contact information. And this section can be super important in making your program sustainable. So having this information organized and on hand allows for the program to continue regardless of staff turnover or other factors that may require you to go back and make sure that you're not duplicating work or you have a better understanding of what's been done in the past. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pass it now to Alex.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for sharing all of that really important and super helpful information. Let's go ahead and take a look then at integrating lead testing and reduction programs into the larger picture of school emergency management planning. The National Preparedness Mission areas, and Madeline has already mentioned these, prevention, mitigation, protection, response, and recovery. They describe the nation's approach to preparedness and define preparedness around those mission areas. So the National Preparedness Mission areas represent an evolution in our collective understanding of national preparedness, and they're based on the lessons learned from terrorist attacks, hurricanes, school incidents, and other experiences. Prevention means the capabilities necessary to avoid, deter, or stop an unintended or intended exposure or poisoning. So we have a couple of questions around that, things like how can we prevent facilities managers from making autonomous decisions without making sure that they're connecting with the planning team? How can we equip maintenance staff, teachers, and other school leaders with the knowledge necessary to prevent use of contaminated water outlets? These are some of the prevention questions we want to ask ourselves. Mitigation means the capabilities necessary to eliminate or reduce the loss of life and property damage by lessening the impact of an event or emergency that we haven't been able to prevent. So we might be thinking, what assessment measures are already in place to ensure that students, staff, and visitors are aware of restricted and contaminated water outlets? Victoria was just talking about signage, for example. And that school staff, including those with a role in building maintenance, EOP planning, and emergency response, know what to do in the event of an individual or mass exposure or poisoning. So these are mitigation questions we want to ask ourselves. Protection means the capabilities to secure schools against acts of natural disasters. And things we might want to think about are things like what steps can be put into place to ensure that extra measures are in place post-disaster, a time when the threat of technological and other hazards can increase, to ensure that school drinking water remains safe. So we've already had an event happen. How can we make sure that we're not having technical issues as well after that, to make sure that the drinking water that we do have available for us is going to remain safe for our stakeholders. Response means the capabilities necessary to stabilize an emergency once it has already happened or is certain to happen in an unpreventable way. And questions around that might include, do your facilities managers and staff members know how to respond in the event of a natural disaster that causes pipe erosion and possible increase in lead exposure? Are there checklists within your site assessments to guide them on what to inspect and in what areas? Again, Victoria was just talking about walking through those checklists and using those guidelines. How often are they trained on the proper courses of action? So these are questions around response that we want to think about. Recovery means the capabilities necessary to assist schools affected by an event or emergency in restoring the learning environment. So after things have already happened, what are the things we're doing to restore our ability to continue our learning environment? So questions that would be related to recovery might be, how can your education agency involve community partners, facilities management staff, physical and behavioral health practitioners, and others in overall recovery efforts, including the development of after-action reports that will guide revisions to existing emergency operations plans? We always want to make sure that we're collecting the new learning and incorporating that in our continual improvement plan for our EOP. These 5 mission areas generally align with the 3 timeframes that Madeline was mentioning before that are associated with an incident: before, during, and after. So before, the majority of prevention, mitigation, and protection activities generally occur before an incident, although these 3 mission areas do have ongoing activities that can occur throughout an incident. Response activities occur during an incident. Recovery activities can begin during an incident and occur after an incident. And those of us who have been involved in incidents are very aware that it's not a tidy progression of linear stages, but that they can blend together. To help avoid confusion over terms and allow for ease of reference, typically we use the terms before, during, and after. So the principles that you can see here on the slide are key to developing a comprehensive school EOP that addresses a range of threats and hazards. If we consider in detail the importance of including a range of threats and hazards, we can identify some examples in our own schools. So, for example, we want to make sure that planning is supported by leadership at the district and school level. Senior level officials can help the planning process by demonstrating strong support for the planning team. We want to make sure that we're getting buy-in from leadership throughout the process and certainly at the end so that leadership can show support by signing off on it. Leadership can also help to include the facilities management staff in making sure that they understand the importance of their inclusion in the overall safety efforts, because as you will hear Madeline say, school safety is everybody's responsibility, and we certainly want to make sure that the folks who are caring for our facilities and our grounds are involved in the process. We want to make sure that planning uses assessments to customize plans to the building level. So we've talked a little bit about how to make sure that we're assessing what threats and hazards are present. We also want to make sure that we're thinking about which particular facilities and grounds that we have and be very specific about that to customize the plan to each particular building. We want to make sure that planning considers all threats and hazards. A comprehensive school emergency planning process must not only take into account a wide range of possible threats and hazards that may impact the schools, such as lead exposure or poisoning, but also address safety needs before, during, and after an incident. So we've talked about making sure that we're looking at all 5 mission areas and we're looking at all 3 parts of the cycle before, during, and after. We want to make sure that a healthy school environment provides for the access and functional needs of the whole school community. Planning should provide for, should include for the needs of students, staff, and visitors. We want to look at if we're going to have visitors, for example, on Grandparents' Day, we want to make sure that we're providing for the needs of children, adults, and the elderly. People with disabilities and access and functional needs can include things like language, transportation access, and medical needs. So these are a lot of things that we want to think about. In terms of lead exposure, it's important to keep in mind that the youngest groups of children are the most vulnerable to the negative impacts of lead exposure. In addition, it's important to ensure that those who cannot easily access drinking water during the school day are provided with safe and lead-free water, and those who may be vision impaired understand in advance which water outlets are safe and unsafe to use, as they may not be able to read or understand signs that restrict use or access. We want to consider all settings and all times. So we've talked a little bit about considering all parts of the disaster cycle, but now we want to think about all parts of the school day, all days of the week, all weeks of the month, that kind of thing. So school EOPs must account for incidents that may occur during and outside the school day, as well as on and off campus. So, for example, school buses, sporting events, field trips. Examples might include outside activities like recess or physical education, before and after school activities like getting on and off the school bus, gathering times and places immediately before and after school. Outside the school day, for example, after school athletic programs, clubs, school dances, weekend sporting events, and field trips during the school day and extended trips. So this may mean that teachers and other staff take steps in advance to secure safe and lead-free water that students can consume while off-site attending an athletic event, field trip, and or while participating in an after-school activity. Finally, we want to ensure that planning follows a collaborative process. So during the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more about the process, the plan formats, and content guidance that are flexible enough to use by all school emergency planning teams. If a planning team also uses templates, it's going to want to first evaluate their usefulness to ensure that the tools do not undermine the collaborative initiative and collectively shared plan. We always want our EOPs to be very customized to our particular location. The REMS TA Web Center website features an HTML version of the guide that I've been talking about that you may find useful. On each page, we offer related resources that will assist in helping you gain a more comprehensive understanding of the topics discussed throughout each section. Effective school emergency management planning and development of a school EOP are not done in isolation. So we want to make sure that our planning process is flexible and one that we're going to adapt to the school district and school's unique characteristics and situation. And we want to make sure that the collaborative team works through these 6 steps to create and implement their school EOP. At each step, schools should consider the impact of their decisions on ongoing activities such as training and exercises, as well as equipment and resources. And so I've mentioned that you can see all 6 of these steps on their own pages on our website. Click through and get a really good explanation of all of these steps of the process. And I want to make sure that we're going to have really good time for the Q&A. So I'm going to probably just go over these really, really briefly and not to take a long time on these slides. So we can see that step 1 includes 3 components, which are form a common framework, define and assign roles and responsibilities, and determine a regular schedule of meetings. We want to ensure that the collaborative team includes lots of different types of members to support lead safety. And I know that we wanted to do a poll on this slide, if we could put that up. So the question for everybody participating today then is, who supports schools with planning around lead testing and reduction within your state or locality? So if you know the answer to this, I know it could be a wide range of stakeholders. If you would just type your answer in the poll box, we'd love to know who's supporting that in your area. Since I'm in California, I think that's a great answer. Cali, PA, United Parents Against Lead, that's great to see. Wow. Oh gosh, just one person in one of our areas. And it happens that way, right? People have lots of different things they're having to do within the scope of their functions. The State Department of Education and the Department of Environmental Protection, the state government, I'm seeing that, public health. This is great. And it looks like there are a bunch of folks who have particular organizations that are focused or departments that are focused, which is so good to see. Wonderful. Okay. Great. Thanks, everybody. So that's something that we can continue to talk more about as we continue this conversation over time. So again, just really briefly, in step 2, we want to understand the situation, and really what that means is we need to identify threats and hazards, and we've talked about that before. We want to assess the risk that's posed by those threats and hazards, and then we want to prioritize them. So we've talked about that before, and these assessments are going to be used not only to develop this initial plan when we first do our EOP, but they're going to inform the updates and revisions to the plan. So we've talked about the ongoing improvement plan, and so this is a super, super important step to understand. And just really briefly, a site assessment is one of the ways that we can figure out what's going on, what we need to take a look at, all of the things we need to put in our list of threats and hazards before we can prioritize them. And so I'm pretty pleased to be telling those of you who have not seen it before, let me go back to this slide, but I want to just talk a little bit about our mobile app for conducting site assessments. If you haven't seen it, it's so wonderful. The mobile app is designed specifically for education agencies, and it allows personnel to walk around buildings and grounds and conduct a site assessment. You can do this on a phone or on a tablet. It equips practitioners with information and knowledge about fundamental site assessment topics. So you don't have to feel like you don't know what you don't know or what questions you need to ask. It's all there in the app. You can explore it more on our website. You can download it onto your device. You can give us a call or shoot us an email and ask for support on that. So I'm just always really pleased to tell everybody that there's this very comprehensive tool that's out there. So just really quickly, I want to make sure that we talk about when we're planning a site assessment, whether we're using the Site Assess tool, whether we've already got a template or we're working with a partner to do that. But we want to make sure that we're thinking about who from facilities management is involved in this. We want somebody with a lot of familiarity. What knowledge about the school grounds might they have that is unique? Who else can provide insight into the history or age of the buildings, because that really affects the possibility of lead being present, and then what areas of the school grounds. That's something Victoria talked about, and certainly Madeline did too. So I just wanted to touch on that really quickly. But I know we're really getting to the place where we want to talk about Q&A. So the last thing that I want to say in terms of step 2 is I want to talk briefly about capacity assessment, because once you've gotten to a place where you've identified your threats and hazards, you've evaluated the risk that they pose, we want to think about what tools do we have to deal with that, to assume that risk, to manage that risk, and to figure out how we can keep everybody safe. So our capacity assessment is really an important part of step 2. And one of the ways that we can make sure to do that then is to include all of the information that our safety team needs so that they're equipped to handle the variety of threats and hazards the school may face. So we want to think about asking ourselves, do we have the capacity at our school to ensure facilities management staff are trained? We want to make sure that they at least get annual training on the school EOP and the annexes that are specific to things like lead exposure, because we want their involvement. So I've got one more quick poll, and then I think we can go to Q&A. So the question for everybody, if we can put that up there, is, has your agency or your state received funding that supported site or capacity assessments related to lead testing or reduction? And then if that has happened, if you know whether that's from local, state, national, or federal agency, where the funding came from, that would be great to know. Okay. So we're getting some yeses, we're getting some nos, we're looking at some federal funding. State funding. We're not sure. That's very common. State funding. Great. Oh, I'm so happy with this number of yeses. Oh, hopefully these no's will turn to yeses as time goes on. That's great. Thanks so much, everybody, for participating in that. So I want to turn things over to Madeline now to walk us through the rest of the steps in the process. Madeline?
Thank you so much, Alex. Appreciate it. So please know, everyone, that you can download the presentation. There are just a couple of examples that we have woven into the 6 steps. If folks are unfamiliar with the 6 steps, we encourage you to see our other webinar that goes over the 6-step planning process. Or a nice break from webinars is we have a publication that we've written, and we've explained it all in just a few pages with wonderful examples as well. So before we switch over to the our Q&A, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew about the different federal supports that we do have available. And we continue to make more in collaboration with our partners, and so do our partners. So currently, the Environmental Protection Agency and the U.S. Department of Education are working on developing an MOU with multiple federal partners and as well as some of the nonprofits. The partners include Health and Human Services, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, Department of Agriculture, Housing and Development, Department of Justice, Department of Labor, and so on. So with that, we are working on, well, Victoria and her team are leading efforts to conduct a wide range of activities to support this issue. That includes research, surveillance, and more resources. Now, with the MOU is being named the 3Ts MOU, and so and in that effort also includes multiple nonprofit organizations that focus on the same topic, including the American Water Works Association, American School Health Association, and even associations that focus on water, such as the Metropolitan Water Agencies and the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. There's many more, but the reason I bring this up is that you should know that there are plenty of resources for you out there at the federal, state, and local level. So Victoria is going to tell us just, Victoria, her team is leading a grant program, and we'll make information available for you via Twitter. And then also there's going to be information in the pod, and we will place it on our website as well.
Thanks, Madeline. And I would just like to add that the links are all available. You guys can find out about this new testing program. It's about $44 million that are going to be given to all 50 states and DC to implement testing programs. So we're very excited about that one.
Thank you so much, Victoria, and thank you so much, Madeline. We also want to briefly share details about National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week, which will be happening this October. So we encourage you to partner with EPA, CDC, HUD, and the Department of Education to collaborate and to share information and to promote awareness. We are going to, again, direct you to the web link pod as well as the handouts pod for resources that have been referenced throughout this presentation. And as Madeline mentioned, please follow us on Twitter for additional information that you might need. We also have details here about just additional contacts for support. And you can also reach out to us during the presentation or during the live web chat that we'll be hosting 30 minutes after this presentation. So we are going to take a moment now to address a few questions that were submitted. The first was actually, this is for you, Victoria, and the question is, do schools have maintenance guidance related to drinking water, or can EPA provide guidance to schools related to drinking water? For example, guidance on how to flush drinking water fixtures after summer breaks. And Victoria, I believe you spoke to this a little bit during your presentation, but I just wanted to give you the chance to elaborate if you'd like to.
Thank you so much. So there's a lot of tools in the 3Ts about flushing and implementing best practices. So there is actually a flushing best practices fact sheet, which talks about the do's and don'ts of flushing, when it's appropriate to use, how you flush, what flushing actually is. And we talked about this earlier. It's basically running the water so you can get fresh water into the building. It's especially important after breaks. And that information is all in the 3 Ts. It includes recommended timing for different fixtures. For the most part, some of this stuff is somewhat standardized. There are some considerations for coolers. So coolers can hold multiple liters of water, and they may be a little bit more flushing time. But that's all in the 3 Ts. So you can find a lot of information there. It has a few other recommendations for after breaks and routine practices, so check those out as well, like cleaning your aerators. Those are the screens on the ends of faucets, and they're meant to, well, basically aerate the water and collect any particulate or sediment that may be trapped in the pipes. Some people don't know that this can also be in water fixture or water fountain fixtures as well. So some water fountain fixtures have screens in them, so making sure you know where those are so you can get those cleaned out. That way you don't have sediment buildup or issues with lead particulate, which we didn't talk about today, being built up in the screens or aerators.
Thank you so much, Victoria, for answering that question. Madeline, we have another question that I believe you or I could answer, as well as Alex. What types of school stakeholders should be involved in the planning and overall process? Madeline?
Thanks so much, Janelle. I encourage you, if you're at the state level, to reach across and work with your state level partners who manage and regulate the water system. And at the state level, I think it'd be beneficial to also include some practitioners in your state that have some experience. And then at the district level, I encourage you also, if you have a practitioner that's working at one of your schools, every individual has different talents, to have them be a part of it. And always remember to reach out to your nearby non-public schools, and perhaps if there is an independent public charter school nearby, if you all got together and did some joint planning, it would be of great support to your partners. And now, Alex and Janelle, I'm going to pass it to you to give a few more details.
This is Alex. I definitely am a big fan of not reinventing the wheel and talking to my colleagues about who's already done the work. And we've talked so much about making sure that we've got the right internal stakeholders in terms of people who are very familiar with the grounds and the buildings and all of that stuff. But I think I'd just like to tack on to what Madeline said and talk to folks who might already have gone through this process. I've been in so many meetings where we're sitting around joking about the age of the building that we're sitting in, especially for us here in Southern California, and talking about where we might end up if there were an earthquake. So we're all pretty aware of the relative ages of our buildings, and if we have colleagues that we know are in the same boat, it can be so helpful to get their perspective on it and to talk to them about what work they've already done and whether they would be willing to share that and what tips they have for us so that we can kind of stand on their shoulders and build on that work. Janelle?
Thank you so much, Alex and Madeline. Madeline, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I meant to, Victoria, I meant to also give you an opportunity to expand and describe some of the work that other partners might be able to contribute, such as those from the local EPAs or Health and Human Services and such, if you wanted to add, please.
Thanks, Madeline. Yeah, I mean, you have already touched on quite a few really important partners. The 3 Ts does have partners listed as examples, but there's always more. And some of those might be the local health department, so recognizing that schools and child care facilities may be able to lean on local health departments to provide important risk communication or lead health information. That might be something that those experts could help with. There are water system personnel that could be helpful, especially considering their expertise with lead in drinking water and plumbing. They might also have really important information about the the water that may be coming into your building and the distribution system level. So there's a lot of really great partners that could help out with programs like this.
Thank you so much, Victoria, Madeline, and Alex. And we have one last question that I am going to turn to you, Victoria. And we have a participant that wants to know if EPA has information on how many cases of elevated blood levels have been attributed directly to drinking water.
Well, that's a really good question, and I'm not sure that we have a number or could have a number just because of the multitude of factors that go into lead exposure. As I mentioned before, the degree of exposure depends on a lot of different factors, including frequency, duration of the exposure, level of exposure, and individual susceptibility factors like age, whether you've had lead exposure in the past, nutrition, and health. There's also considerations for ages and how much drinking water is being used. So we talked about when we were discussing health effects, the considerations for infants and younger children whose diets primarily include drinking water, so infant formula or juices or foods that are going to involve tap water and drinking water.
Thank you so much, Victoria. And thank you to all of our presenters and participants. We do see that there were a few additional questions that we were not able to get to today. However, we do encourage you to join us right now on the Community of Practice. If you have not already created an account, creating one is very easy and it should not take you long, and we will be sure to address the additional questions that you have posed during our web chat. Thank you so much again for participating in this webinar. And thank you again, Victoria, for collaborating with the Department of Education on this event. Of course, you can connect to the REMCA Center in a variety of ways, including our toll-free phone line, as well as our email, info@remcacenter.org. Be sure to also follow us on Twitter for daily updates on TA Center activities and important information and services from our collaborative partners. Thank you again for your time today. This concludes our webinar.